Have you ever heard of a family literally throwing away their 9-year-old child like a piece of garbage, just to come crawling back 25 years later when that kid strikes gold? Because today's story is going to make your blood boil. The audacity of these people is actually insane. My name is Silas Vance. I'm 34 years old, and I own a chain of high-end bespoke furniture showrooms across the West Coast that people love to call inspiring. Like success somehow makes a brutal story easier to digest. It doesn't, because no matter how solid the empire I've built looks now, no matter how thick the wood or how strong the steel I work with, there is one sound that can still drag me straight back to being 9 years old. A phone ringing and ringing while I stand there frozen, already knowing the people on the other end want something they should have fought for decades ago. That day in my main workshop, my phone screen lit up again and again with numbers I didn't have saved, but somehow recognized anyway. I just let it ring. 5 minutes. 10. 30. I kept planing a massive slab of raw walnut, checking the joints, signing supplier invoices, acting like my hands weren't gripping the tools tight enough to turn my knuckles white. Because the last time I waited for those people, I was a little boy with a tiny canvas duffel bag, sitting on a hard wooden bench in a place that smelled like industrial bleach and old, damp coats, listening to adults promise they would only leave me there for a little while. My mother took my brother. My father took my sister. And I was the one left behind at an orphanage. Like I was the extra piece of lumber nobody had room to load onto the truck. For years, there was absolutely nothing. No calls, no letters, no birthday cards, no heavy footsteps walking back up the path for me. Before my family shattered, we looked like any other blue-collar American household from the outside. We lived in a working-class suburb in Ohio, in a drafty 2-story house with a rusting Chevy in the driveway and a front porch that always needed painting. My father, Arthur, worked the assembly line at the local auto plant. My mother, Eleanor, was a cashier at a grocery store. My older brother, Julian, was the golden boy, loud, charismatic, the kind of kid who could talk his way out of any trouble. My little sister, Lily, was the baby, all tears and clinging hands, demanding constant protection. And then there was me, Silas, the one in the middle, the quiet one, old enough to understand the gravity of the tension in the house, but young enough to still believe that a father's job was to protect his sons. When I think back now, I can still remember the smell of sawdust in the garage when my dad used to tinker with broken chairs. A skill he never quite mastered, but one that fascinated me. Home felt functional. Not warm, but functional. Then the auto plant initiated massive layoffs, and my father was handed a pink slip. He said it was a temporary setback. Then the severance ran out. Then he stopped looking for work and started finding his solace at the bottom of cheap bourbon bottles. My mother picked up double shifts, and the air in our home turned toxic. Whispered arguments over unpaid heating bills morphed into full-blown screaming matches that shook the thin drywall. You can always tell when your parents are preparing to destroy your world. They stop looking you in the eye. They speak in hushed, hurried tones when you enter a room. My father started sleeping in his truck. My mother stopped cooking entirely. Julian spent all his time at his friends' houses. Lily cried constantly, and I became the ghost who observed it all, trying to make myself as small and unproblematic as possible, hoping that if I didn't cost them anything, they wouldn't get rid of me. The night it all came crashing down, I was sitting at the top of the stairs. I heard my mother hiss, "I cannot carry this family alone anymore, Arthur. I am done." My father slurred his response, telling her to pack her bags and get out. The silence that followed was suffocating. Days later, they sat us down at the scratched kitchen table. They spoke with that hollow, rehearsed calmness that adults use when they are lying to children. They said they were separating. They said it wasn't our fault. Then, the logistics of dismantling a family slipped out. My mother wanted Julian. He was older, more independent, and he could help her out. My father, surprisingly, fought for Lily. He said she was his little girl. She needed him, and he couldn't bear to leave her. Nobody said my name. I sat there, a 9-year-old boy, waiting for the natural conclusion of the draft. Who gets Silas? Neither of them made a move. Later that night, I stood in the dark hallway outside their bedroom. I can't take two of them, Arthur, I just can't afford it, my mother snapped. And I'm living out of a damn motel right now, Eleanor. I can barely feed Lily, my father fired back. Then my mother said the words that would eventually freeze my heart solid. We'll send him to St. Jude's, just for a little while. They take kids in emergencies. Let them keep him until we get on our feet. 2 days later, my mother crammed a few pairs of jeans and shirts into a canvas bag. My father drove us in absolute, heavy silence. They didn't call it abandoning their son. They called it a temporary housing solution. St. Jude sat behind a towering chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. It was an old brick building that looked more like a penitentiary than a sanctuary. In the front office, a social worker with tired eyes took my paperwork. My mother knelt down, not quite meeting my gaze. Be a good man, Silas. Don't cause trouble. We'll come back for you soon as things settle down. My father stood by the door, hands in his pockets. He didn't even step toward me. He just nodded. Then, they turned around and walked out. They did not look back. They did not wave. They got into the car, carrying the children they wanted, and drove away, leaving me standing alone on the cold linoleum floor. I am absolutely spiraling right now. How do you just pack up the kids you want and drive away? How do you leave a 9-year-old boy standing on a cold floor while you literally just leave? What kind of monsters do this? How would you even survive that kind of betrayal at that age? The first night at St. Jude's, I didn't sleep. I lay on a narrow cot with a plastic mattress cover that crinkled loudly every time I took a breath. The dormitory held 8 other boys. Some snored, some cried quietly into their thin pillows, but I lay perfectly still, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. I kept my boots on. I was convinced that my father would wake up in his motel room, realize he had made a catastrophic mistake, and come driving back through the night to pick me up. That is the pathetic, enduring loyalty of a 9-year-old boy. You are programmed to believe your father is a hero, even when he has just thrown you to the wolves. The next morning, and every morning after that for weeks, I spent my free time standing out in the recreation yard. My fingers curled around the cold metal of the chain-link fence. I watched the road. Every time a pair of headlights cut through the Ohio gloom, my chest would tighten. But it was always delivery trucks or staff members or social workers. Never Arthur. Never Eleanor. I learned the unwritten rules of the orphanage quickly. In a house full of discarded boys, showing sadness was a liability. The older kids could smell grief like blood in the water. If you cried, you were weak. If you were weak, you were a target. So, I learned to swallow every emotion, pushing it down deep into the pit of my stomach until it hardened into a cold, heavy stone. I stopped talking unless spoken to. I did my chores with military precision. Wake up. Make the bed tight enough to bounce a quarter off it. Scrub the dining hall floors. Don't ask questions. My assigned counselor, Mr. Davis, was a decent man completely overwhelmed by a broken system. He would call me into his cramped, paper-cluttered office once a week. He would ask me how I was adjusting, avoiding the only question that mattered. Eventually, I asked him, "When are they coming?" He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Your parents are dealing with some very complex financial and personal issues right now, Silas. We are trying to establish a timeline." It was corporate speak for "I have no idea." I found out later, from a sympathetic nurse, the narrative my parents had spun to save face. My mother had told our extended family that I had been accepted into a special boarding school for boys with behavioral issues, a lie designed to paint her as a concerned parent making a tough choice, and me as a problem child. My father simply told his drinking buddies that I was living with my mother. They covered their tracks, erasing me from their public lives so they wouldn't have to carry the shame of what they had done. The definitive breaking point, the moment the 9-year-old boy died and the man I am today began to form, happened about 3 months into my stay. I was tasked with emptying the trash cans in the administrative hallway. I paused outside Mr. Davis's door. It was slightly ajar, and he was on the phone with his supervisor. "I've sent 3 registered letters to the mother's new address, and I've left voicemails at the father's place of work," Mr. Davis was saying. his voice laced with frustration. Nothing. They aren't returning calls. We have to change his status. The family is entirely non-responsive. We need to prep him for the foster system. Non-responsive. That single, clinical word hit me harder than a physical blow. It was so sterilized, so detached. It didn't sound like betrayal. It didn't sound like a father choosing his pride over his son, or a mother choosing convenience over her own flesh and blood. Non-responsive. They weren't lost. They hadn't been in an accident. They were actively listening to messages about their son, looking at letters with my name on them, and choosing to throw them in the trash. They were getting the letters, they were getting the voicemails, and just throwing them in the trash. It wasn't a mistake, it was an active choice. If you were the social worker, what would you even do in this situation? I would have driven to their house and dragged them out by their hair. I didn't cry. I walked back to the dormitory, took off my boots, and placed them neatly under my cot. I stopped waiting by the fence. I stopped looking at the road. I took the small, faded photograph of my family that I had kept hidden inside my pillowcase and tore it into tiny, unrecognizable shreds, flushing them down the institutional toilet. A child can survive poverty. A child can survive hunger. What deeply fractures a boy's soul is the undeniable mathematical realization that when his parents had to balance the books of their life, he was the only negative asset they chose to liquidate. From that day forward, I made a silent vow. I would never rely on anyone whose blood was in my veins. I would build my own armor. I would become entirely self-sufficient, and I would make myself so immovable, so formidable, that nobody would ever have the power to discard me again. Leaving St. Jude's for the foster care system wasn't a rescue. It was just a transfer to a different kind of prison. Between the ages of 10 and 16, I was bounced across 4 different foster homes. If the orphanage was characterized by institutional coldness, the foster system was defined by grueling transactional indifference. When you are a ward of the state, you don't pack luggage. You pack heavy-duty black trash bags. Every time a placement failed, because the family needed the room, or they couldn't handle the stipend reduction, or they just got bored of playing savior, I would stuff my meager belongings into a garbage bag, heave it over my shoulder, and stand on a new porch waiting for a stranger to open the door. It is a profound psychological conditioning. When your entire life is constantly packed in the same plastic bags people use to throw away rotting food, you inevitably begin to view yourself as disposable. I quickly realized that survival in the system required making yourself completely invisible. I became a machine. I didn't ask for seconds at the dinner table. I didn't ask for help with my homework. I never complained about the cold or the threadbare clothes. My third placement was on a struggling dairy farm run by a man named Miller. He didn't take in foster boys out of the goodness of his heart. He took us in because we were free labor subsidized by the government. My day started at 4 a.m. I shoveled manure, hauled feed bags that weighed nearly as much as I did, and repaired fencing until my hands were covered in bloody, callous blisters. Miller was a cruel, bitter man who liked to use his tongue like a whip. Whenever I couldn't lift a particularly heavy piece of equipment, or if I didn't move fast enough to suit his temper, he would spit tobacco onto the dirt and sneer at me. "You got the blood of a quitter in you, boy," he'd say, leaning on his pitchfork. "No wonder your own folks tossed you out with the garbage. You ain't got the spine to be worth keeping." I never talked back. I just gripped the shovel tighter, letting the physical pain in my muscles drown out the humiliation in my chest. I learned to channel my rage into the work. The harder I swung the hammer, the quieter the ghosts of my family became. It was during my time at the local high school, escaping Miller's farm during the day, that I found my sanctuary. It wasn't a person. It was the school's industrial arts woodshop. The shop teacher, Mr. Henderson, let me stay during lunch hours and after school to clean the tools and sweep up. In exchange, he let me use the scrap wood. The first time I ran my hand over a piece of rough-sawn oak, feeling the dense, unyielding grain beneath my calloused fingers, something inside me clicked. Wood made sense to me in a way people didn't. People were chaotic. They lied. They made promises they intended to break before the words even left their mouths. They changed their minds and left you behind. But wood? Wood was honest. If you measured it wrong, it wouldn't fit. If you rushed the sanding, the finish would be cloudy. But if you paid attention, if you applied patience and discipline, if you respected the material and cut it true, it would yield to you. It would hold weight. It would be sturdy. It would last. I started spending every spare second in that shop. I learned how to use the lathe, the bandsaw, the chisels. I learned the difference between a dovetail joint and a mortise and tenon. I stopped feeling like a discarded foster kid and started feeling like a craftsman. When I held a block of wood, I wasn't at the mercy of the state or my runaway parents. I was in total control. I could shape it. I could build something that had value. I built small things at first, boxes, simple stools, picture frames that held no pictures. I hid them in my locker because I knew if Miller found them, he would either sell them or burn them to punish me. The woodshop became my religion. The hum of the saw was my choir, and the smell of pine and cedar was my incense. It was the only place in the world where I felt a sense of worth. I realized that if I couldn't rely on a family to give me a foundation, I would quite literally have to build my own from scratch with my own 2 hands. And nobody was going to stop me. By the time I turned 17, I had been moved to my final foster placement, a cramped, chaotic house in the city limits. I was a senior in high school, hardened, silent, and relentlessly focused on my ticket out. That ticket was the annual statewide industrial craftsmanship competition. The grand prize was $5,000 in cash and a full scholarship to a prestigious trade and design academy. For a kid who owned nothing but the clothes on his back and a set of second-hand chisels, it was a lifeline. For 6 grueling months, I poured every ounce of my soul, my sweat, and my meager earnings from a weekend dishwashing job into my entry. I decided to build a handcrafted, Maloof-style rocking chair out of solid black walnut. It is a notoriously difficult design, requiring complex, sculpted joints that have to flow seamlessly into one another so the chair looks like it grew out of the ground rather than being assembled. I worked late into the night in the school shop. I sanded the walnut until it felt like glass. I rubbed oil into the grain until the rich, dark chocolate colors of the wood practically glowed. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever created. It was proof that I was not garbage. It was my future sitting right there on the workbench. 2 weeks before the competition, the past came knocking. Literally. I was at the foster house when the front doorbell rang. I opened it to find a young man standing on the porch. He was taller than I remembered, his face sharper, but he had the same confident, slightly arrogant smirk. It was Julian, my older brother. He was 20 now. I stood there, blocking the doorway, my body immediately tensing into a defensive posture. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. He gave me a look of practiced sympathy. "Silas, man, look at you. You're huge. Can I come in?" Against my better judgment, the deeply buried, starving part of me that still remembered being a 9-year-old boy looking up to his big brother relented. I let him in. We went to the dilapidated back porch. Julian brought a 6-pack of beer and started talking. He played the family card with the skill of a seasoned grifter. He told me how much he had missed me. He claimed he had fought our mother for years about what she did, that he had tried to find me, but the system kept my records sealed. Then, his voice dropped, taking on a tone of heavy sorrow. "Mom's sick, Silas. Really sick. She talks about you all the time. Cries herself to sleep. Dad's a mess. Completely off the wagon. It's been hell, man. I'm just trying to keep the family together. We need you. I need my brother back." I listened. I wanted to reject it, but the isolation of the last 8 years had left a microscopic crack in my armor. I was 17. I wanted to believe that somewhere out there, my blood meant something. I told him about the chair. I told him about the competition, the scholarship, the $5,000 that was going to change my life. I even showed him the $300 I had saved in a coffee can in my room to rent a truck to transport the chair to the state capitol. Julian looked at me with what I thought was pride. "That's incredible, little brother. You're gonna win. I know it. Tomorrow we're gonna celebrate. I'm gonna help you." He slept on the floor of my room that night. For the first time in nearly a decade, I fell asleep feeling a strange, fragile sense of belonging. I woke up at 6 a.m. The floor was empty. Julian was gone. A cold spike of dread drove straight through my chest. I scrambled out of bed and checked my closet. The coffee can was tipped over, empty. Panic setting in, I ran out of the house and sprinted the 6 blocks to the high school. I convinced the janitor to let me into the shop. I walked over to my workbench. It was empty. The walnut rocking chair, my masterpiece, my ticket out of hell, was gone. Julian hadn't come to find his brother. He had come because he was in deep with local bookies. He had tracked me down, assessed what I had of value, fed me a sob story about a sick mother to lower my guard, and robbed me blind in my sleep. He sold 6 months of my blood and sweat to a pawn shop 2 towns over for a fraction of its worth to cover his gambling debts. I couldn't recover it in time. I missed the competition. I lost the scholarship. I lost the money. Oh my God, the brother, the older brother. He played the sick mom card just to rob his foster care brother blind while he was sleeping. What is your breaking point here? Because I swear, if my own brother did this to me, I am burning the entire city down. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood in the empty woodshop, staring at the blank space on the bench. That was the day the last remaining ember of childhood innocence was extinguished. I realized the most brutal truth of my existence. Strangers will hurt you because they don't care about you. But family will gut you because they know exactly where to slide the knife. From that second forward, Silas the brother was dead. Only Silas the survivor remained. The betrayal by Julian didn't break me. It forged me. It crystallized my resolve into something impenetrable. With the scholarship gone, my path to a formal design education evaporated. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I needed a job, I needed a master, and I needed it immediately. I spent days walking the industrial outskirts of the city, knocking on the doors of every custom millwork shop, cabinet maker, and furniture studio I could find. I was rejected constantly. I was just a brooding 17-year-old kid with a foster care record and no formal credentials. But then I walked into the dusty, sprawling workshop of Garrett and Sons. There were no sons, just Elias Garrett, a 60-something Vietnam veteran with a permanent scowl, hands like worn leather, and a reputation for being the most demanding master carpenter in the tri-state area. I walked right up to him while he was adjusting a table saw. "I need a job," I told him, making direct eye contact. "I work harder than anyone you've ever met. I don't complain, I don't need breaks, and I already know how to handle timber." Garrett looked me up and down, taking in my cheap clothes and the hard, defensive set of my jaw. He tossed a heavy push broom at my chest. "Caught it. You sweep the floors," he barked. "You empty the sawdust extractors. You organize the lumber racks by species and board foot. If you do it right for a month without whining, I'll let you touch a sander. Minimum wage. Now get out of my light." That was the beginning of my real education. Elias Garrett was not a warm man. He did not ask about my past, and he didn't care about my feelings. He was exactly the kind of father figure I needed, one based entirely on merit, respect, and unyielding standards. He saw the quiet, simmering rage inside me, but rather than trying to counsel me, he taught me how to weaponize it. I swept his floors until they were spotless. I organized his lumber with obsessive-compulsive precision. True to his word, a month later, he put a random orbital sander in my hand. From there, it was a grueling apprenticeship. Garrett demanded perfection. If I cut a dovetail joint that had even a millimeter of gap, he wouldn't just correct me. He would pick up a hammer, smash the piece to splinters right in front of my face, and tell me to start over. "Wood is expensive, kid," he would growl. "But your reputation is priceless. You don't pass off mediocre work. Ever." One evening, after I had spent 6 hours meticulously hand-carving a set of cabriole legs for a dining table, Garrett walked over. He ran his calloused thumb over the curves, his face unreadable. Finally, he looked at me. "You've got a gift, Silas. A real eye for proportion. But talent is cheap. Talent makes a lot of noise. Discipline is what builds an empire. Keep your mouth shut, keep your tools sharp, and trust your hands. They're the only things in this world that won't lie to you. It was the closest thing to a compliment I had ever received, and it meant more to me than any "I love you" from the parents who had abandoned me. Months later, I turned 18. The state's foster care system unceremoniously discharged me. My social worker met me at a diner, handed me a manila folder containing my birth certificate, my meager medical records, and a check for $200, the grand total of what the state determined I needed to launch into adulthood. We shook hands, and that was it. I was entirely alone in the world. No safety net. No emergency contacts. No home to return to if things got tough. Most kids who age out of the system with nothing end up dead, incarcerated, or homeless within 2 years. But they didn't have Elias Garrett, and they didn't have the burning, obsessive need to prove their existence that I did. I took that $200, rented a suffocatingly small room above a loud dive bar, and went to work. I had no illusions about the world. I knew that stability, peace, and respect were violently expensive, and I was starting with a negative balance. I had a heart of ice, hands that could build anything, and a mind that refused to accept defeat. I was ready for war. The decade spanning my 18th to my 28th year was a blur of relentless, bone-crushing labor. I didn't live, I functioned. I operated with the singular, obsessive focus of a man trying to outrun a ghost. I kept my apprenticeship with Garrett during the day, absorbing every technique, every business lesson, and every standard of excellence he had to offer. But the meager wages of an apprentice barely covered rent and food. So, I took on a second job doing grueling construction and demolition work on the weekends, swinging sledgehammers and hauling concrete to build my physical strength and my bank account. And at night, from 10 p.m. until 2 a.m., I worked as a bouncer and cleaner at the dive bar beneath my apartment. I survived on black coffee, cheap diner food, and 4 hours of sleep a night. My body constantly ached. My hands were permanently stained with wood finish and calloused like stone. I didn't date. I didn't go to parties. I didn't have friends. Socializing required emotional energy I simply did not possess, and more importantly, it required time I needed to spend working. By the time I was 22, Garrett's health began to fail. He couldn't handle the heavy lifting anymore, so he started handing the premier clients over to me. I began designing and building custom pieces under his roof, splitting the profits. Word started to spread among the wealthy elite of the city. There was a young, intense craftsman who built furniture that didn't just fill a room, it commanded it. My pieces were heavy, masculine, and flawlessly executed. Massive dining tables made from single slabs of reclaimed redwood, imposing executive desks accented with forged steel, chairs that felt like thrones. It was during this time that I met Marcus. He was a high-end interior designer who walked into Garrett's shop looking for a custom credenza for a tech CEO client. Marcus was sharply dressed, and possessed a ruthless business acumen. He looked at a walnut desk I had just finished, then looked at the price tag Garrett had let me put on it. Marcus laughed. Not a mocking laugh, but a genuine chuckle of disbelief. "Silas," he said, handing me his sleek business card. "Your craftsmanship is world-class, but your pricing is an insult to your own talent. You are charging them for the wood and your time. You need to start charging them for your name, your vision, and the exclusivity. You are leaving tens of thousands of dollars on the table because you still think like a kid surviving on food stamps." Marcus became my strategic partner. He didn't try to be my therapist. He respected my boundaries and focused entirely on the empire we could build together. He brought me affluent clients who didn't blink at 5-figure price tags, and I delivered masterpieces that justified every penny. When I was 28, Elias Garrett passed away quietly in his sleep. I attended his funeral, one of only a handful of people there. I stood by his grave, a silent, stoic man, paying my respects to the only father I had ever truly known. He had left the lease of the workshop and all his heavy machinery to me in his will. It was the only inheritance I would ever receive. I took my life savings, partnered with Marcus for branding and logistics, and completely overhauled the business. I ripped down the old signage and put up a massive, matte black steel sign. Iron and oak. It wasn't just a woodshop anymore. It was a bespoke design house. I hired 2 apprentices of my own, both young men who had recently aged out of the foster system just like I had. I paid them a living wage, demanded the same brutal perfection Garrett had demanded of me, and taught them how to hold their heads up. The launch of Iron and Oak was terrifying. I had leveraged everything. The fear of failure, the fear of ending up back in a garbage bag with nothing, was a cold sweat on the back of my neck every single day. But fear is a potent fuel if you know how to combust it. I didn't let the fear paralyze me. I let it drive me into the shop at 4 a.m. every morning. I channeled every ounce of the abandonment, the betrayal, and the isolation into the business. I built an empire to prove that the boy they threw away at St. Jude's was worth more than the entire bloodline that discarded him. And as the business exploded, as the waitlist for an Iron and Oak original grew to over a year, my armor only grew thicker. I was a self-made man in the purest, most agonizing sense of the word. I had built my castle, and I stood on the battlements alone, heavily armed and entirely untouchable. By the time I turned 34, Iron and Oak was no longer just a workshop. It was an institution. I owned 6 sprawling, high-end bespoke furniture showrooms stretching down the West Coast, from Seattle to Los Angeles. Walking into one of my galleries was an experience carefully engineered to command respect. The air was always heavy with the intoxicating, masculine scent of raw leather, oiled steel, and expensive, aged timber. My clients were tech billionaires, A-list actors, and titans of industry, men and women who understood that true luxury wasn't mass-produced, but forged by calloused hands and uncompromising vision. I didn't just sell them tables and desks. I sold them a piece of my relentless discipline. My personal life remained fiercely guarded. I didn't let people in easily. I didn't have the capacity for superficial small talk or the energy to entertain people who hadn't earned their place at my table. But then I met Elena. Elena wasn't a romantic cliché. She was a brilliant, highly sought-after commercial architect who had been hired to design the layout for my flagship showroom in San Francisco. The first time we met on the construction site, I was wearing a dust-covered canvas jacket, measuring a load-bearing beam. She didn't try to charm me. She just looked at my blueprints, pointed out a structural flaw in the vaulted ceiling design with absolute clinical precision, and told me how to fix it. I respected her instantly. Elena possessed the same quiet, ruthless work ethic that I did. She understood the language of blueprints, steel framing, and deadlines. More importantly, she understood me. She never pushed to excavate my past. She never demanded emotional performances that I wasn't equipped to give. She saw the fortress I had built around myself, and rather than trying to tear down the walls, she simply pulled up a chair and sat comfortably inside the gates. We became partners in every sense of the word. She was the only person on earth who was allowed to see Silas the man, rather than Silas the machine. Meanwhile, I made sure my success meant something tangible. I implemented a strict hiring policy at Iron and Oak. 30% of my apprenticeship positions were exclusively reserved for young men who had recently aged out of the state's foster care system. I knew exactly what it was like to be handed $200 and a plastic bag of clothes and told to survive. I brought these angry, lost, hardened kids into my shops. I didn't offer them pity. I offered them hammers, sanders, a living wage, and the exact same grueling, uncompromising standards that Elias Garrett had beaten into me. I taught them that while the world owed them nothing, their own 2 hands could build everything. The turning point, the moment the insulated world I had constructed finally collided with the wreckage of my past, came during an interview with a premier national design and business magazine. They were doing a massive feature on the self-made titans of West Coast craftsmanship. The journalist, a sharp, perceptive guy in a tailored suit, spent 2 days shadowing me in the shop. He watched me plane a 10-foot slab of reclaimed redwood. Finally, we sat down in my office for the formal interview. He asked all the standard questions about profit margins, design philosophies, and supply chains. Then he leaned forward, clicking his pen. "Silas, you have a very unique aura about you. Your business model, your aggressive hiring of foster youth, It's deeply personal. Most men at your level of success come from generations of wealth or Ivy League connections. You're a ghost before the age of 18. Where does this drive come from? Who built the man who builds the empires? I could have given him the sanitized PR answer. I could have talked about overcoming adversity and finding inspiration in the craft. But I was 34 years old. I was worth millions of dollars. And I was entirely out of patience for lies. I looked the journalist dead in the eye, my voice dropping to that low, flat register that always made my employees stand up straighter. Nobody built me, I said, the words heavy as iron. I was a middle child in a broken home. When times got hard, my mother took my older brother, my father took my younger sister, and they dropped me off at an orphanage like an unwanted piece of luggage. They never came back. I spent my childhood moving from one abusive foster home to another in black trash bags. I build things that last because the people who brought me into this world proved to be entirely disposable. I am where I am today because I was abandoned, and I refused to let my destruction be their legacy. The journalist stopped writing. The room went dead silent. He knew and I knew that he had just struck journalistic gold. The article dropped 3 weeks later. The headline didn't focus on my furniture. The headline read, "Abandoned at 9, Empire Builder at 34. The unbreakable Silas Vance." The word was finally out there in print. Abandoned. Not lost. Not separated. Abandoned. It was the absolute, undeniable truth, broadcast to millions. And just like that, the scent of fresh blood was in the water. Of course, it only took 3 days for the ghosts to show up once the word millionaire was printed. They smell the money. How fast do you think you would have blocked those numbers? It took exactly 3 days for the ghosts to find the door. I was in the San Francisco workshop late on a Tuesday evening, finishing the joinery on a custom dining table. The heavy, rhythmic sound of my mallet hitting the chisel was the only noise in the cavernous space. Then, my personal cell phone buzzed on the workbench. It was a number from an Ohio area code. I didn't recognize it, so I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, it rang again. Then a different Ohio number. Then a text message. Then another call. I set down my mallet, wiped the sawdust from my hands onto my heavy denim apron, and picked up the phone. I had 4 new voicemails. I pressed play, my expression turning into a mask of stone. The first voice hit me like a physical blow to the chest, transporting me instantly back to the cramped, chaotic house of my childhood. It was Julian. His voice was older, rougher, but the underlying cadence of the arrogant golden boy was still there. "Silas, man, it's Julian. Your brother. I saw the article. I can't even tell you how crazy it is to see your face. Listen, we need to talk. There's so much you don't know. So much we need to explain. Please call me back. We're family, see?" I didn't flinch. I deleted the message and played the next one. It was a woman weeping. Lily, the baby sister who had been chosen by my father because she was cute and clingy. "Silas? Is this really you? Oh my God. Silas, I'm so sorry. I've missed you my whole life. Please, I just want to see my big brother. Please call me." The third was my mother, Eleanor. Her voice was thin, reedy, shaking with what sounded like the weight of 1,000 regrets. "My beautiful boy, my Silas, if you only knew the agony I've lived with. Please let your mother explain. I love you. I never stopped loving you." The last one was Arthur, my father, the man who had walked out of St. Jude's without looking back. His voice was a gravelly whisper, choked with emotion. "Son, I don't have much time left. I just want to look you in the eyes and make it right before I go. Please." I stood alone in the quiet workshop, surrounded by hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of tools and inventory, listening to the desperate pleas of the people who had thrown me away. I felt no warmth. I felt no sudden rush of familial love. I only felt a cold, calculated clarity. You don't survive the foster system and build a multimillion-dollar business by being naive. I knew exactly how human nature operated. Silence is easy when the person you wronged is poor, struggling, and invisible. But the moment you strike gold, the moment your name carries weight and your bank account is full, suddenly everyone finds their conscience. I didn't call them back. Instead, I called Marcus. Marcus wasn't just my business partner. He was a master of logistics and information. I forwarded him the numbers and told him to run a complete, discreet background check on Arthur, Eleanor, Julian, and Lily Vance in Ohio. I want to know their financial status, their employment history, their criminal records, and exactly how desperate they are. Spare no expense. Have it by Friday. Marcus didn't ask questions. He just said, "Consider it done." 72 hours later, Marcus walked into my office and dropped a thick manila folder on my desk. He poured himself a cup of black coffee, sat down, and looked at me with a grim expression. "It's ugly, Silas. Really ugly," Marcus said, tapping the folder. "Your sudden media presence didn't trigger a moral awakening. It triggered a survival instinct. They didn't come looking for a son and a brother. They came looking for a bank." I opened the folder and read the meticulously compiled data. It was a spectacular portrait of generational failure. My father, Arthur, had entirely drank away his severance and his pension. He had declared bankruptcy 3 years ago and was currently living in a dilapidated trailer park, facing eviction and suffering from advanced liver cirrhosis that he couldn't afford to treat. My mother, Eleanor, had burned through 2 more marriages. Both ended in bitter divorces. She was currently unemployed, living on government assistance, and drowning in credit card debt. Lily, the precious little sister, had dropped out of community college, had 2 kids with a man who was currently serving time for aggravated assault, and was constantly bouncing between the couches of friends and relatives. But Julian's file was the masterpiece. My older brother, the golden boy, the thief who had stolen my rocking chair, had a rap sheet. Petty theft, DUIs, and worse. Currently, he was unemployed and, according to Marcus's private investigator, in debt for over $30,000 to some very dangerous, unsavory loan sharks in Cleveland. They were actively looking for him. I closed the folder, the heavy thud echoing in my quiet office. Life had done what conscience never could. It had cornered them. They had spent 25 years pretending I didn't exist, successfully burying their shame. But suddenly, their discarded trash had turned into a winning lottery ticket. My story wasn't a family tragedy to them anymore. It was an ATM machine. I looked up at Marcus, my face entirely devoid of emotion. "Have our corporate attorneys contact them. Tell them I will meet with them. One time. On my turf. Tell them to fly to San Francisco next Thursday. Book them cheap economy tickets and a 2-star motel. And tell security we're going to need the main shop cleared out after hours." I orchestrated the meeting with the precision of a military ambush. I didn't invite them to a neutral coffee shop. I didn't invite them to a restaurant where societal norms would force us to be polite. I ordered them to come to the Iron and Oak main production facility in Oakland. It was my fortress, my domain. I wanted them to walk into the belly of the beast and physically feel the immense, crushing weight of exactly what I had built without them. It was 8 p.m. on a Thursday. The massive industrial space was empty of my crew. I had turned off the harsh overhead fluorescent lights, leaving only the dramatic, warm spotlights illuminating the colossal pieces of machinery. The industrial CNC routers, the massive table saws, the towering racks of exotic timber imported from all over the world. The smell of oiled metal and rich mahogany was thick in the air. I was waiting for them at the center of the shop, sitting at the head of a massive, 20-foot dining table I had hand-carved from a single slab of petrified walnut. I was wearing my heavy leather work boots, dark denim, and a tailored black button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, exposing the thick, scarred muscle of my forearms. I had a block of scrap pine in one hand and a razor-sharp carving knife in the other, slowly, methodically shaving off thin curls of wood. The heavy steel rolling door hummed open, operated by my head of security. The 4 of them walked in. For a fraction of a second, watching them step into the cavernous space, a ghost of the 9-year-old boy flickered in my chest. But it was instantly extinguished by the reality of the pathetic, broken figures standing before me. They looked small. Arthur was hunched and yellowing, his clothes hanging off his frail frame. Eleanor looked aged and haggard, clutching a cheap purse like a life preserver. Julian looked nervous, his eyes darting around the expensive machinery, calculating the dollar value of the room. Lily trailed behind, looking terrified. They stood at the opposite end of the 20-foot table. Nobody moved to hug me. The sheer, intimidating scale of the room and my absolute, freezing silence kept them pinned to their spots. "Sit," I commanded, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. They scrambled to pull out the heavy oak chairs and sat down, huddling together. For a long, agonizing minute, I didn't say a word. I just kept dragging the knife down the block of pine. SHHHK. 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 The psychological pressure in the room was suffocating. I wanted them to drown in the silence they had given me for 2.5 decades. Finally, Eleanor broke. She buried her face in her hands and started to sob loudly. "Silas, oh my beautiful boy, look at you. You're a man. You're so successful. I am so sorry. You have no idea what it was like. We were starving. We were broken. I thought St. Jude's would give you a better life than the gutter we were living in." Arthur chimed in, his voice shaking. "We made a mistake, son. The biggest mistake of our lives. I was drinking. I wasn't in my right mind. But not a single day went by that I didn't think about you. I swear to God." Lily was crying quietly, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "We didn't know, Silas. They told me you were at a fancy boarding school. By the time I found out the truth, I didn't know how to find you." Then Julian leaned forward, putting his elbows on the table, trying to summon that old, charismatic big brother charm. "Listen, see. We screwed up. Big time. Mom and Dad panicked. But we're here now. We're a family. And looking around this place, man, I am so damn proud of you. We can fix this. We can start over." I let them talk. I let them exhaust their scripts. I listened to every pathetic excuse, every rewritten memory, every attempt to soften the brutal edges of their treason. They wanted the narrative where they were tragic victims of circumstance who made a hard choice out of love. When the silence finally returned to the room, save for the sound of Eleanor's sniffling, I stopped carving the wood. I set the knife down on the table. The sharp clack of the steel made Julian jump. I looked at them, my eyes flat, dead, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. Nobody answered. They just stared at me, the creeping realization dawning on them that the son they had come to manipulate was entirely immune to their tears. I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. Anger is a hot emotion, and hot emotions show that you still care. I didn't care. I was absolute, freezing absolute zero. I walked over to a steel workbench behind me and picked up 4 thick, black leather-bound folders I had prepared earlier that day. I walked back to the table and tossed one in front of each of them. They hit the solid walnut surface with a heavy, definitive thud. "You keep using words like mistake, circumstance, and panic," I said, pacing slowly behind my chair, looking down at them like a judge presiding over a courtroom of the condemned. "You want to paint a picture where the universe conspired against you, forcing your hand. You want absolution without accountability. So, let's look at the facts. Open the folders." Arthur's trembling hands fumbled with the cover. Eleanor hesitated before flipping hers open. "Page 1. I dictated, my voice cutting through the air. "A copy of my intake form from St. Jude's Orphanage. Note the signature at the bottom, Arthur. That's yours. Right below the clause acknowledging the surrender of parental rights." Arthur squeezed his eyes shut, turning his head away. "Page 3. I continued, relentless. "A log of communications from my assigned social worker, Mr. Davis. Over a period of 6 months, he left 42 voicemails across both of your phone numbers. He sent 14 registered letters. Turn to page 4. Look at the official state designation stamped in red ink. Non-responsive." I leaned forward, planting my large hands on the table, closing the distance between us. "You didn't lose me. You didn't make a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pay the electric bill. What you did was a calculated, deliberate execution of your responsibility. You threw your 9-year-old son into a garbage incinerator because he was financially inconvenient, and then you actively ignored the smoke. Eleanor was sobbing hysterically now, rocking back and forth. We were drowning, Silas. We had nothing. I had nothing. I roared, my voice finally cracking like thunder, making the heavy tools on the workbenches rattle. I had a plastic bag. I lived with a man who worked me like a mule and beat me if I didn't shovel the horse manure fast enough. I went to bed starving while you two played house with the children you deemed worthy of keeping. I took a deep breath, instantly regaining my terrifying, stoic composure. I turned my gaze to Julian. He was sweating, looking anywhere but at my face. Now, let's talk about family loyalty, I said, my voice dropping back to a lethal whisper. Turn to page 12. Julian hesitantly flipped the pages. When he saw what was there, the blood completely drained from his face. He looked like he was going to vomit. What is this? Arthur asked weakly, looking at the document. That, Arthur, is a copy of a police report filed in Hamilton County, Ohio, exactly 17 years ago, I explained casually. When I was 17, I spent 6 months building a masterpiece, a walnut rocking chair. It was my entry into a state competition that carried a $5,000 prize and a full scholarship to a design academy. It was my literal ticket out of poverty. I walked around the table until I was standing directly behind Julian's chair. I placed my hands on the back of his seat, feeling him tremble. My beloved older brother, Julian, tracked me down. He came to my foster house. He told me a beautiful story about how much he missed me and how sick our mother was. He slept on my floor, and while I was asleep, he stole the chair and my life savings and pawned it to pay off his gambling debts. He stole my future to cover his own pathetic failures. Eleanor gasped, looking at Julian in horror. Julian, is that true? Julian stammered, looking frantically between his mother and me. I was in a bad spot, man. I was gonna pay you back. I swear. Silas, I just needed time. You're a parasite, I said softly, leaning down right next to his ear. You didn't come here to be a brother. You came here because you owe 30 grand to the Rossi crew in Cleveland, and you saw my face on a magazine and thought I was your golden goose. Julian practically collapsed into the table, burying his face in his arms. The illusion of the loving family reunion was utterly, completely annihilated. I had stripped them naked, exposing the ugly, greedy truth of exactly who they were. There was no more hiding behind nostalgia. There were only the cold, hard receipts of their betrayal. The air in the workshop was heavy with the stench of their exposed shame. I walked back to my chair at the head of the table and sat down, crossing my arms over my chest. I looked at the wreckage of the Vance family. Arthur, seeing that the sentimental route had been completely vaporized, finally shifted to his true agenda. Desperation makes men bold, and it makes them incredibly stupid. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot and pleading. Silas, you've made your point. You're right. We are monsters. I am a monster. But look around you, son. You have an empire. You have millions. I am dying. My liver is failing. The treatments, I can't afford them. I'm going to die in a trailer park. I'm begging you, just a loan, just to keep me alive. It's pocket change to you. Before I could even respond, Julian picked his head up, sensing that the dam of requests had been broken. He's right, Silas. You've won. You beat us all. But I'm a dead man if I don't pay off these guys in Cleveland. I know timber. I know the business. Give me a job. Let me manage one of your showrooms. I'll work for free until the debt is paid. Just protect me, brother. Wait. He wants a job? The guy who stole the rocking chair and the $300 wants to manage a high-end showroom? The audacity is actually making me dizzy. How do you even respond to this level of entitlement? I stared at them. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was almost magnificent. They had thrown me into the meat grinder of the foster system, left me to rot, stolen my only chance at escape, and now they had the nerve to ask me to fund their salvation. I slowly stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke with the absolute, crushing authority of a king issuing a final decree. Listen to me very carefully, because I am only going to say this once. I began, my eyes locking onto Arthur's. I did not spend the last 25 years bleeding over table saws, breaking my back carrying concrete, and surviving on 4 hours of sleep to build a landing pad for the people who threw me out of the airplane. Arthur flinched as if I had struck him. I don't care if your liver fails, Arthur. I don't care if they throw you out of your trailer. When I was 9 years old and terrified in the dark, you didn't care if I lived or died. Your medical bills are your problem. Die with the consequences of your choices. I turned my terrifying focus to Julian. And you want a job? You want me to put you in charge of my showrooms? You steal from your own blood in their sleep. If you ever come within 100 yards of one of my businesses, I won't just fire you. I will personally ensure the Rossi crew knows exactly where you are sleeping. Handle your own debts, thief. Eleanor was a weeping mess, practically sliding out of her chair. Silas, please. We are your family. You can't be this cruel. You can't just turn your back on your own blood. You taught me how, Eleanor. I fired back, my voice dripping with venom. You gave me a masterclass in turning your back on blood. I'm simply applying the lessons you taught me at the gates of St. Jude's. I took a breath, letting the finality of my words settle over them like concrete. Then I looked at Lily. She was the only one who hadn't asked for a dime. She had been a toddler when the fracture happened. She was a victim of their incompetence, just like I was, though she had been given the luxury of a roof. Lily, I said, my tone softening just a fraction of a degree. She looked up, her eyes wide and fearful. You didn't ask to be part of this circus. You were a kid. I don't hold their sins against you. But you are still a stranger to me. I pulled a business card from my pocket and slid it across the massive table. There is an email address on the back of that card. It goes to a private server. You can email me once a month. No requests for money. No sob stories about these three. Just updates on your life. If you want to slowly, very slowly, get to know the man your brother became, I will read them. If you ask me for $1, the email gets blocked permanently. Do you understand? She nodded furiously, clutching the card like it was a diamond. I understand. Promise, Silas. Thank you. I looked back at the other three. As for the rest of you, you are permanently dead to me. Do not call my phone. Do not show up at my showrooms. If you attempt to contact the media to sell a sob story, my legal team has a dossier of your criminal records and financial fraud that will bury you so deep you won't see daylight. You wanted to see me? You've seen me. Now get the hell out of my shop. They didn't argue. They didn't try to plead anymore. The absolute, unyielding wall of my boundaries had broken their spirits entirely. Arthur struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on the table. Eleanor couldn't even look at me. She just stared at the floor. Julian kept his head down, terrified of making eye contact. I watched them walk the long, humiliating distance from the table to the steel rolling door. They looked exactly like what they were. Failures who had gambled away the most valuable thing they had ever possessed and lost everything. When the heavy steel door finally rolled shut with a deafening clang, sealing them outside in the cold Oakland night, the profound silence of the workshop returned. I didn't feel a rush of triumphant joy. I didn't feel the need to shout or celebrate. I just felt an immense, overwhelming sense of lightness. The ghost of the 9-year-old boy sitting on the bench at St. Jude's had finally stood up, picked up his bag, and walked away. The past was dead and buried under 20 feet of solid concrete. I heard a soft footstep behind me. Elena stepped out from the shadows of the glass-walled design office on the mezzanine level. She had been there the whole time, out of sight, just as we had planned. She walked down the metal stairs, carrying 2 steaming mugs of black coffee. She didn't ask me if I was okay. She didn't offer platitudes or try to hug the trauma out of me. She just walked up to the massive walnut table, handed me a mug, and stood beside me, looking at the empty chairs where my family had just sat. The joint work on this table is flawless, Silas, she said quietly, tracing the grain of the wood with her finger. I took a sip of the bitter coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. Yeah, I replied, my voice steady and calm. It took a long time to get the rough edges out, but it's solid now. It can hold any amount of weight. The real revenge, the sweetest and most devastating revenge a man can ever achieve, isn't found in screaming matches or physical violence. It isn't found in ruining their lives. They were already doing a fine job of that themselves. The real revenge was the realization that burned in their eyes as they walked out of my shop. They saw the empire. They saw the millions of dollars in inventory. They saw the respect, the power, and the absolute control I wielded over my life. And they had to walk away knowing that they possessed absolutely zero claim to it. They didn't get to stand beside me at the finish line and call themselves part of the miracle. They were the fire that burned my childhood to the ground. They didn't get to live in the castle I built from the ashes. 2 weeks after that meeting, I sat down with Marcus and my corporate lawyers. We drafted the paperwork to officially establish the Iron and Oak Foundation. We structured it so that 20% of the net profit from every single piece of furniture we sold was funneled directly into a trust. The trust had a singular, uncompromising mission. It provided fully funded apprenticeships, housing stipends, and emergency legal and medical grants exclusively for young men aging out of the state foster care system. I started it because no boy should have to become a hardened, ruthless warrior just to survive a childhood that adults failed to protect. When those boys come into my shop, defensive, angry, and clutching their worldly possessions in garbage bags, I see myself. I don't give them a shoulder to cry on. I give them a sanding block. I look them in the eye and I tell them the only truth I know. Bloodline is nothing but a biological accident. Genetics do not make a family. A real family is forged in the trenches. Family is proven by the men and women who stand shoulder to shoulder with you when you have absolutely nothing in your pockets. Family is defined by the people who stay in the room when walking away is the easiest option. I am Silas Vance. I am a master carpenter. I build things that are designed to last for generations. And for the first time in my 34 years on this earth, the life I have built is finally strong enough that the boy they left behind never has to look over his shoulder again. Silas didn't just survive. He absolutely destroyed them with facts and receipts. That moment he threw those leather-bound folders on the table with the non-responsive documents. That was pure poetry. His parents literally treated him like garbage because they couldn't afford him, but somehow kept the other two. And Julian is the absolute worst kind of parasite. Silas owes them nothing. Zero. The fact that he set up a foundation for foster kids instead of giving a single dime to his deadbeat dad or loan shark brother proves he is a king. He broke the generational curse with his own 2 hands. User at Woodworker Pro says ESH. Silas is rich now. He could have just paid off his dad's medical bills and cut contact. Letting a man die in a trailer park is cold. Are you serious right now at Woodworker Pro? You think Silas is the bad guy for not paying the medical bills of the man who literally dumped him at an orphanage at 9 years old and ignored 42 voicemails? No, the dad made his bed, and now he gets to lie in it. User at Justice for Silas says NTA. The way he handled Lily was actually really mature. He set a firm boundary but left a tiny window open since she was just a kid when it happened. Exactly. He didn't punish Lily for what the parents did, but he protected his peace. She gets 1 email a month, no begging for money. That is how you set a healthy boundary. What a legend.